Hi, what's up everyone? This is Don with Third Creative, and this is the walkthrough tutorial video for Modern Classic. In this video, I am going to thoroughly walk you through all of the layers, all the steps and processes that will hopefully help you create the best images possible with this template design. Before we jump into the layers and the template itself, I want to touch on a few things. One is that I originally created this design, or the first version of it, back in early 2023. The version that you see over here on the left-hand side. And kind of a modern look with the exception of the block letter in the background. I wanted to offer a more traditional look, and so when I sat down to polish this design up and get it ready to be a template, I created this font scheme. So this design includes two font schemes, one with a more modern look, one more with a more classic look, and that's how I came up with the name Modern Classic. Speaking of the font selections, when I originally created the design, I used a font that requires a commercial license. It's one of my favorite fonts. It's called Another Danger. It's this aggressive brushstroke font that you see here. Every other font used is free for commercial use, but this one is not. So it is entirely up to you whether you want to use Another Danger font or if you want to stick with the classic look on the right hand side, or you can go and find another font of your choice. That's the good thing about fonts, is that they're interchangeable. You can use any font that you want, but these two versions, or these two font schemes, are what I thought looked best. And so for anybody who remembers the original version when it came out and has asked for it to be released, I wanted to make sure it was available as an option in its original form. So let's talk a little bit more about Another Danger. From your PDF file, when you click on the font link, it's going to bring you to the dafont.com page for Another Danger. Here you can download a free version, which is the demo version. However, if you want to use it for commercial use, you will want to select this link that you see right here. And if you launch that, it will take you to the page where you can purchase the commercial version, going to the creator of the font. At this time, it's $24. I don't know if that will change, but that's always a possibility. But again, if paid fonts are not your thing, you can use any other font of your choice. Another thing that I need to cover about the fonts is the sticking with the modern version. This font you see here is called MIT Sans. It is free for commercial use. However, a buddy, Derek Montgomery, brought it to my attention this morning because I didn't originally notice that, well, let's get rid of that, that on the B Fonts page, which this is the link that will take you to access this font, you would scroll down, dodge all these banners here, and you will click on the download link. But I never noticed that the format is a RAR file, which is basically a zip file. So when you click download, it's going to launch if it will cooperate, yeah, it'll launch a separate tab or screen. Do not click this red button here. That is a little banner ad. Just wait for it to download. Now you see up here, it is a RAR file. If I click on it, it's automatically going to unzip. If you're a Windows user, I believe you can right-click the zip file and just select unzip. However, if you are a Mac user, you don't have that option. So I wanted to give you a few options here. One, Derek brought to my attention, is that this site, rarfileopener.online, allows you to unzip. You can click here to select the zip file that you want to unzip, or you can drag and drop it here. Another option, if you're on Mac, is to go to the App Store and type in the Umarchiver, which is an app that I've had for a long time, and it just automatically unzipped that file. But I anticipate that for Mac users, or maybe for some Windows users, this might stump you for a second, so I wanted to touch on that and a few options that you have. And I think that's it for the font selection. What else? Another thing that seems to come up often is the fact that these files are all Tiff files, and that throws some people off. I say it comes up often because a few other designs that I've put out, I've done them as layered Tiff files, and the reason for that is because there's so much packed into these files. Looking at this graphic here, you can see I've got all of these sport textures, and they're all in a subfolder, and this makes the file size fairly large. So I can no longer use PSD as the file format. I have the option to use PSB, which is a large Photoshop file, or a layered Tiff file. Layered Tiff files work just like a Photoshop file, but they do compress data much better, and they do not have the maximum 2 gig maximum for the file size. So it is a layered Tiff file. Something that comes up often with Tiff files is that they don't always just launch in Photoshop. So once you've downloaded your files, if you just click on them, they may open in like a image previewer or something else. So you have a few options. On Mac, you can always right click, go to get info, and then if you come down, let's see here, to open with, you can expand that, and you can select the program that you want Tiff files to open with. I have mine set to Adobe Photoshop 2024. You would hit change all and continue, and now if just by clicking them they would open in Photoshop. If you don't want to do that, you can always right click and select open with, and open with Photoshop. And then of course another option is just to come up here to File, Open, and you can select the file that you want to open. So if that trips you up, those are some options for you. Let's see, we have this pulled up, so we can go ahead and talk about the fact that we've got all of these texture files in here, and you have the option to put them in their original natural form, like you see this softball and basketball here, or you can colorize them, which we'll get into that. You can kind of see a little bit better here. We've got natural basketball, and then we've got red. We've got natural softball, and we have orange. So just another option. So I think I've covered everything. I think it's time to jump into this thing. Let's see. First thing that I recommend when you open this up is to come to the center. Well, actually, probably the best thing is to move this out so you can see all the text on the layers. That'll help. So the center letter sport options, expand it. Now you can see all of these textures. It's currently set to softball, but you want to identify the one that you're going to be working with. So if you are working with softball, then I would suggest that you select, just hold down Shift and delete everything else that you won't be using. Hit delete. So now you just have this one. Now you want to save as and change the file name. So this will make your working file much smaller, and it will also be saved under a new name, and it won't overwrite your original. So let's go ahead and undo that. All right. Now we're getting started. Let's go to the very bottom and we'll take a look at background layers. Come to the very, very bottom. We've got change background color. So pretty simple. Just double click this icon here to get your color picker pulled up. If it'll cooperate, there we go. And you can set it to any color that you like. Next we have our side stripes change color. So I've set it up so that you don't have to open this folder. If you want to change the color of all of the stripes, just click on the color overlay icon here, click on this box, and you can change it to any color that you like. You also have the option to turn on this stroke outline, and so by doing so you can click on stroke and you can select the color that you want for the stroke. Another option that you have, if you want your stripes to be a little bit thicker, is to copy the color code that you have for the stripes themselves. So I'm going to hit Command C, Control C, and then you can apply the same color to the stroke. Now you can play with the size. You can make them thicker or bigger, smaller, thinner. You get the idea. That is an option. Now, some of the sample images, I have the center stripe a different color. If you want to make them different colors, just turn off right here this color overlay and open it up and turn on color overlay on each stripe. Now you can control them independently. So if I want the middle one to be gray, I can do that. All right, so I think that covers that. Next we have frame, which is optional, change color. So that's referring to this, this three-dimensional frame that we have here, for lack of a better thing to call it. If you turn it off, you can see it still looks good. And I think this is a good point to talk about this. When it comes to cropping, sometimes a frame can cause problems. I'm working with a 2x3, maybe should have used the 4x5, but if you crop to different ratios, you may lose some of this, or it may not look right. So if you're going to use the 4x5 to make one file and then crop it to make, say, 5x7s or 2x3s out of one file, you may want to either turn this off, which does change the look, or you can click and drag the sides so that they extend out beyond the edge. And if you do that, you cover up the stripes, so you would want to bring it down. And so you get the three-dimensional look at the top and the bottom, which you may or may not like, but it is an option, so you can do that. If you do turn this off, let's come back down to these side stripes. I have a layer mask here, and it is not linked. See if you click in between the layer mask and the folder, you can lock it or unlock it. So it is unlocked, so this allows you to select the layer mask itself. Now, if I hold down Shift and click to turn off the layer mask, you see they go all the way through. So this is what hides it in this section. You can click and drag in or out, and then click in the center to make sure that it is centered, which this little anchor point here, you just want to make sure is lined up with the very center inch mark, which for this file is 8. But you have the option to bring them in, bring them out. Just another option. So let's keep it moving. Next we have paper texture. So it's pretty subtle. Let me zoom in. I'm going to turn off these two so we can just see what the paper texture, didn't mean to do that. Cooperate. All right, it's very subtle, but you can see some paper texture here. One thing is that I have the opacity at 30%. So if you want more, you can bring up the opacity, and I think I moved it earlier when I was struggling with it. You can bring up the opacity to get more of the effect. Another way to get more of the effect is to select the unlocked or unlinked layer mask. And you can see it kind of extends out beyond the edges. So because it's unlinked, I won't be affecting the actual texture itself. I'll only be changing the mask. I can click and drag it down, drag it in, all the way close to the edges, and that will bring the layer mask in and allow more texture to show further in if that makes sense. So those are two ways that you can get more or less of that effect. The same thing applies to this next one, which is a grunge layer. If I open it up, you can kind of see it's similar, but it's just a little extra. And you can do the same things with the grunge. You can increase the opacity or decrease it, and you can also expand or contract this layer mask. And then lastly, we have an exposure layer with a layer mask that is basically a vignette, which darkens the edges. So same thing. You can leave it linked or locked, and you can, I hold down Shift and Option to keep it the same, and you can bring it in. You don't have to. You can bring in the edges one at a time, just like that, and that will bring the vignette in and create more of a spotlight effect. Another option you have to increase or decrease the effect is to double click here to bring up the properties, and you can see the exposure is what, -50. So if you want a little bit more, you can bring it more. If you want less, if you want it brighter on the edges, you can adjust that. So let's see, which one was it? Yeah, this one, this bottom one here, you can see the top versus the bottom. I made it a little darker, a little more of a spotlight effect, and didn't do quite as much on this top version. So you can kind of see what that looks like. So let's undo all of that. Okay. Next, what do we have? We've got our center letter sport option. So let's talk about this. I'm going to go ahead and turn off our subject just so we can see everything here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit too. So we touched on this a little bit, but you've got all these options here: wrestling, volleyball, we've got a tennis ball, we've got swim/water, we've got a softball, soccer, hockey ice, hockey puck, we've got a golf ball, a football, bowling ball, basketball, and 2 baseball options. So let's talk about how you can change it from a colorized version to a natural version. So one thing is each of these has a hue, saturation, smart filter, and a levels. Both of these smart filters are adjustable. So when you apply your color, which I might be getting ahead of myself, let me jump down here. The way that you control the color is actually down here with the center letter itself. So you will select the color that you want. So, we can go with, we'll just stick with red, but you get the idea. That's how you change the color, the actual color. Now, if you want, once you change your color, if you don't like how light or dark the texture or the seams are, come into levels. If you're not familiar with levels, it's kind of a curves for dummies. Maybe that's a little bit too harsh, but it's curves very simplified. So you don't have as much control, but it gives you control of your lights, darks, midtones. Up here you'll see these 3 anchor points, and so this furthest to the right controls your lights. If I bring it, you can see it darkens it. So if you wanted the black to show a little bit more, over here on the left is your blacks, the middle one is your midtones. You can bring your blacks from left to right to increase them, and you can adjust it like that. You can always decrease your blacks down here or decrease your lights down here, but you can fine-tune basically the contrast so that it looks good. We'll cancel that. Also, when you change your letter, this may not be lined up perfectly, so with the texture that you're using, you can click an anchor point and you can rotate it. You can scale it down, scale it up. You'll want to position it so that it looks good with the letter that you put in there. So if it's not H, you might want to change it just a little bit. Now, if we wanted the natural version of any of these sport textures, what you would want to do is come up to your blend mode. I have these set to multiply. Actually, I need to touch on that. If you change the color and multiply looks a little bit weird, which there was one sample image that I did or was it darken? It's either darken or multiply. These two are the options. So if you see a little bit of color, you want to switch to the other, and you can adjust the levels to your liking. But darken or multiply are the two blend modes that you would use for colorized. If you want it natural, you would come up to normal. If opacity is not at 100% already, you just slide it up to 100%. Now, I've got hue saturation applied, so it's desaturated. Now you can either turn it off and just play with the levels, which you would come in here. It doesn't really look quite right, so you can come back to your starting point, put a 1 in there. That's a starting. Shouldn't have hit enter. Now you can, what I would probably do is slide this a little bit to the right to get a little more brightness. Now you can play around with it, move your midtones right and left to see what you like there. And now you can see that the edges. So this is a situation where you would want to adjust it. So you bring it up, bring it down, something like that. So now you have the natural look. So just to recap, change the blend mode from either darken or multiply to normal. Make sure opacity is 100%. Turn hue saturation off and adjust your levels to your liking. I thought about putting one of each versions in here, but the file size is already just way too big. So unfortunately, I had to just stick with one texture layer and just explain how to change it if you don't already know. So hopefully that will help you there. You can do the same thing, you know, with any of these. If we look at swim, if we turn off, well, we can't forget to come up to normal, turn off your hue saturation, and you've got your levels. You could turn that off, it's a little bit darker. So you can play with the levels, but this might be one where you would leave hue saturation on and just open it up and bring your saturation up to a point that you like. But let's say you want the color of the water to shift ever so slightly. You can move it right or left. It starts to get to unnatural colors, but you know, you've got a little bit of play there. You can make it more saturated. You can make it lighter. And of course, you can control the lightness and darkness with levels as well. But you have all of this control. It's just up to you on the look that you want. But hopefully that will explain how to do it. So I really messed this thing up. Let's get it back to its original state. I think that covers almost everything with the center letter. I think there is one other thing to touch on real quick. Depending on the letter that you put back here and depending on the size and the pose of your subject image, you may want to make an adjustment to the letter itself. And by that I mean select the letter, come up here to your character panel, and right here you can control the width of that letter. I have it set to 150%, and in this case it looks good. You can see how far you can push it on how wide. Some letters it may look unnatural or look a little bit weird if you start getting over, you know, up to 150% or more. But you can make it wider, and this allows it to cover a little more space and extend out from behind your athlete where the viewer can still see and understand what it is. You can also do the same thing, you can, or the opposite. You can narrow it and find what looks good. If you narrow it, then you can make it bigger, which I guess what I will do to make it bigger is just come up here, and right now we're at 625, so 650. Type in different values, 675. Yeah, that didn't work. Let's try it again. Well, come on. 675. Here we go. And then, of course, you can move it up and down. If you do move it around, make sure that you hold down Control Command and select both the texture and the letter at the same time. Now I can use my arrow keys, move it up, down, move it around, and get it positioned how I want it. So I'm being super thorough here, but I just know that these things come up. So I want you to be equipped and prepared to handle it. Now we can go back to the original state. Now that's everything for the center letter, I believe. Let's look at the upper text layers. We'll open that up. Here is where you will start to see the different font scheme options. So it is set to option 1, which is the more classic look. Turn that off and turn on font scheme option 2, and we'll get the more modern look. So let's go back and open this up. I went ahead and put in a few options here for the name text. So we've got player name arched. If you want it straight, you can always go up into your settings and change it to straight, but I've got it set up where you just turn it off and turn on the straight option. Controlling the color is very simple. You just come up here in your character panel, or up in this bar, or if you have it all selected, you'll see it up here as well. Very simple. You can increase the size of this, and you can also change the degree of the arch if you want or need to. Same thing with the options down here, which we'll touch on. But if you ever want to change the effect, just double click on the text box to get everything highlighted. Once you have your text layer highlighted, up here you will see this icon, this T with a curve. We'll click on that, and this is where you can get your warp options. I have it set to arch with a +10. So if you want more, you can just increase the value. If you want less, you can decrease the value. Simple as that. Let's see. And then of course we've got our senior, junior, sophomore, freshman options, subtext. You can always change the space between each character. It's currently set at 600. You can change it to anything that you think looks good if you need it at a different value than what it already is. You can always go with bold. You can change the size. All of these are options. All right, let's go back. Let's always change everything up here. Looking at the next option, there's only one. I didn't put an arch in here, but the same thing applies. Colors change the same ways. Same thing with the sub font. And here is where you'll see it in red, because I just want to make sure everybody knows that this font, Another Danger, does require a commercial license, but it's the same thing: senior, junior, sophomore, freshman, and the name itself and the colors are all changed the same way. Of course, you can change the size and the what do they call it, the kerning. This is set at 0. You can spread it out if you want or need to. Pretty simple. Let's go back to the original. All right, we've got our subject images. I have a layer mask here, which is linked. So if you need to change that, we'll just hit this little box here. And one way is just to click on the top and bring it up, bring it down. That's the easy way. Of course, if you want, you can always select your layer mask, go to your gradient tool, make sure that you have black to white or white to black, and click and drag, opposite. You just keep doing it until you get it how you want it. But you can recreate your layer mask depending on how your text is situated, what colors the uniform are, what color the background is. You know, this is a lot of white on white, but if you have something different, you might want to change it. Let's see. It's got a drop shadow, which you can turn off. If you don't like that, you can open it up and you can play with the values: opacity, distance, size. I have it set to a value that I think looks good, but I will say if you have a dark background, you might want to increase the value so that it shows up. If you have like a really dark gray background, you might not really see that as well. So something to look out for when you're first setting it up or you're doing your first athletes. Otherwise, it's pretty simple. You just insert your extracted subject images into this folder, scale and position it, and that's where you will keep your subject images. Something I've been doing for a while now is including a color grade option. So if I turn it off, you can see, not real drastic, but she's a little bit cooler. This looks great, but if you want to add a little warmth and contrast, you can turn this on. It's set to orange and it's set to soft light at 10%. If you want more, you can increase it, but it does start to look a little too much at some point. So you don't want to get too carried away with it. You can also adjust the color. So depending on the color of your background, you can stick with these yellows all the way. This looks really good. If I move it all the way to red, that may be even better than the orange that I have it set to. In some rare occasions, or maybe not so rare, but some occasions you might want to go with the blue ranges if you want a cool look rather than a warm look. Typically you'll stay away from the purples and the greens unless you're doing something, you know, really different. But that's how that works. You can always turn it off if you don't like it or if you don't want to use it. All right, last one we have here is our lower text layers. Like the upper text layers, it's broken into 2 subfolders. So we have our font version 1 or font scheme 1, and then we have font scheme 2. So let's jump into the font option 1. Here I've got several options that I wanted to include. So this one we have, well, what is the name of it? Let's come up here and just look. Bulge. So it's a reverse bulge. So instead of expanding outward, it contracts inward. I have it set to -10. You can always adjust it depending on, you know, what text you have in here and how it looks. It's adjustable. So that is set to bulge. We'll turn that off, turn this on. This, what is this one called? Arc lower. So it's a reverse arc. Same thing. It's set at -16. If it's too much, you can decrease it. It is adjustable. Let's get out of that. And then we have just a regular arch. And it's adjustable the same way. I won't walk you through all of that. Let's take a look at some of the layer effects that we have here. We've got a bevel emboss. And if I come in here, we can kind of see it's a little bit dark under here. It's pretty subtle. You can open it up and play with the settings if you want more or less of the effect. We have our stroke, and so you'll see that there's a white stroke outline. If you want to change that color, just click on the word stroke, click on this color box, and pick the color that you want. Pretty simple. We also have inner shadow, so you can turn this or open this up, and it's set to 100%, but if you want to play with the size or distance, you can do that. It's adjustable, just like everything else. Gradient overlay, so you'll notice it's kind of a dark red and it transitions into a lighter red. I like the way that looks. And if you don't like modifying gradients, or you don't know how, or you don't want to bother with it, just turn it off, and then you can come up here, change your color that way. I recommend and suggest using a gradient. So you'll just double click here, and you'll have this gradient box that you'll click on, and it'll open your gradient editor. It's very simple. On the left hand side, this controls the lower color. And so if you're wanting to go with blue, you can pick the blue that you want to start with. Click on the right hand side to control the other color that it'll transition to towards the top, and we'll go with a lighter blue. You can kind of see how that works. Once you get one that you like, I recommend that you hit new, and it will save it. And if you need to reapply it on another file or design, you just come down here and it's right there. I've got quite a few saved up here. Just a little tip. So we'll cancel out of that. So that is how you control the colors and the style of the primary text that you have here. Now may be a good time to talk about this font, Samton. It's a pretty cool font family. If you look at this, you've got all of these options. So I have it on this file set to extra condensed bold. So this makes the font taller and take up less space horizontally. If you just have eagle in here, so let's do that. Now it doesn't quite look right. So what are your options? Your options are to make it bigger, but it is taller. So in order to take up enough space horizontally, it might take up more space than you care to vertically. So if that is the case, experiment with the other font family options. So next I would come down to just condense bold, and that will widen it out. Now, if you expand it, it doesn't creep up too far vertically. We'll cancel that. Of course, you have the option to just go with regular bold, and you can look at, I like the bold, but you can look at the thinner versions, the regular and the thin, or the light, and then you have extended bold, which is really wide, and then you have extra extended bold, which is really, really wide. So you have all of these options, and this is a font that's free for commercial use. I've used it in other templates. It's just a great font, especially considering that it is free. So wanted to just touch on that. You'll see the horizontal files. I don't use the extra, the extra condensed bold. You know, I'll use a wider one so it fills up the space better. It's pretty handy. Let's look at font option 2. Font option 2, we just have our another danger. See, there's a few things to touch on this. Inner shadow, double click on that. You can control the distance and the size and the opacity if it doesn't work by default the way that I have it. We have gradient overlay, so it's the same thing. You can turn off gradient overlay and just use a solid color if you want to, or you can use the gradient overlay. I will say on this one, sometimes the way that it lays out or overlaps you may not like. So if you want to take the time, there are some tricks you can do with this. So the L, for example, if I double click here and I highlight just the L, maybe I want, the L looks a little bit small, so I can increase the size a little bit. It's doing some weird things, so maybe I'll just enter it in there. Let's go with 180. Oh, I lost it. Rehighlight. Okay, it's at 180, so let's try 200. You can make it a little bit bigger. You also may want to lower it, and if you want to lower it, well, let's see, right here. I don't know what this is called, but this field right here, if you put in a negative value, so let's try -40 and just see what it does. It brings it down too far. But you can just play with the values, -25. Let's see what that looks like. Still probably just a little bit too much, but maybe -15, somewhere in there. You can find the sweet spot. It might be 20. Oh, it's got to be negative. Yeah, you get the idea. So you can control each letter independently, how big it is, and you can control how high or low it is. Also, if you want a little more space in between, you can come over here to your kerning. I have it set to 80 because everything was so compact. But if you want a little more space, say between, what's a good one here? The A and the D. Select the A and make this value a little bit bigger. So we'll go with 110. It'll probably be too much, but you'll see. Yeah, not too bad. So you can finesse this, fine tune it. If the default way that it lays out doesn't look just right for you, these are a few tips where you can come in and make some adjustments. The sport, pretty simple. You can change it, but let's say if you put it in basketball, it fits, but it might be wider than you like. So you just come up here to your kerning and enter a different value. Try 1200. Or, well, if I can get it to work here, there you go. Just find a value that looks good, and then of course you can always change the size of it. Same thing applies with the year that's down here. And then let's see, we've got this bar. So if I come in here, this bar you can manipulate. If you click on the right side anchor point, you can drag it in, drag it out. But if you do that, go ahead and unlink this, and that way the layer mask will stay centered. So if you want it wider, you can. If you wanted it to be thicker, you can click and drag up and down. You can adjust it if you want to, and then of course you can do the same thing with the layer mask unlinked. If you want a little more space, you can do that. Just try to make sure that the center point is lined up with the center of your canvas. But those are some options there. To change the color, you just click on the color overlay, click on this box, pick the color you want. Pretty simple. And I think that's it. Let's go ahead and talk about one other thing that I didn't mention about this. In some of the sample images, I made the first and last letter bigger than the rest. So if you want to do that, I'm going to show you how. Double click on the text icon here to get everything selected. Now you can just click and drag to highlight the letter that you want. Here you can enter a value that you want. We're at like 278, so let's try 310. Make it slightly bigger. Now, the bottom of it is still level with the rest of the text. So here you would come to this property again, or this field, and if you want it lower, it's negative value. So negative 25 actually looks pretty good. So let's do the same exact thing. We need 310 and negative 25. So we'll click and drag on the last letter, and we'll enter 310 in the size and negative 25. Now can commit, and we can scale and position it how we like it. So I wanted to touch on that because you might see those sample images and wonder, hey, how do you get that look? Okay, gosh, this is long, but they always are. So we still have a few things to touch on with the team or horizontal versions, and then also the memory mate before we can wrap this up. So let's jump over to the horizontal version real quick. Okay, so we have our 5x4 horizontal pulled up, and I just want to touch on a few things. By default, I have it set up so that we have this triangle or pyramid formation. Looks pretty cool and works very well with the size of this particular team. However, different teams can be different sizes, and so you have to adjust accordingly. For example, I've got a single row here for a smaller basketball team, and I think hidden back here, yeah, somewhere back there, I've got a 2-row version here with the volleyball team. I went ahead and set this up with 2 different locations for your subjects, because this center letter has to overlap the subject rows that are diagonal here, but it has to be behind your front row. So I have this folder here with your bottom front row subjects, and I've just got the sample row in here, but this is where you would insert your subjects for your first row or your only row if you're doing a single row. If you opt to use the triangle format here, you would come into this folder, and I've got right side and I've got left side, and so you would insert your subjects and scale and position them in the same way. Now, something you might run into if we turn this off, and maybe even the first. So I've got layer masks here that kind of fade them. You might need to adjust it. I mean, it works for the amount of athletes and the angle that I have them here, but it may need to be different. So let's work with this right hand side. I'll show you some things. I've got the layer mask unlinked, and so that allows you to select this layer mask and work with it only. So I can click on an anchor point here, and I can move it left, I can move it right, but I can also, you can kind of see how the layer mask extends a little bit lower on this first athlete, but it's a little bit higher up here on this athlete. So I could click on the top and drag it down and move it to position it, or I could click and stretch it out, move it and position it. these are just what these different anchor points allow you to change the angle and I guess the amount of distance that it covers to fade from no opacity to full opacity, if that makes sense. So that's how you can adjust that. Now you can always select this layer mask, get you go to your brush tool, come up here. I'm going to use a tool, let's see, what's just the regular brushes. So your soft round, and then maybe put your opacity at say 20. You can go higher. I like 20 and 20 with opacity and flow. Make sure if you want to show more, you can select white. If you're trying to take away, select black. But you can just start to I need to switch. I want less to show. That would help. So I could start to paint out areas. So if you want to manually adjust anything, you can, and then you would just switch to this other one for the left side, and you can fine tune it if anything's showing that you don't want to, or if you want something to show that's not, you can just start to reveal what you want. So hopefully that all makes sense. Let's go back since I've got everything all mixed up here. So if you are not doing this this layout, you would just turn off this angled subject. You'll notice that I have a color grade option duplicated because I don't want it to apply to the entire image. So whatever color and opacity level you have set for your first one, just make sure it's the same for this one. But if you're doing a single row, let me use this as an example here. So I have our single row, and I've got everything all spread out here, but this is that layer mask. Let me actually go back here. This layer mask, it's unlinked, and so if I go to the move tool where I can see it, what I can do, there's an arch. If you notice right here, there's an arch, and so it kind of comes up on the sides and dips down low in the middle. If that is too much, or if you want more dip, you can just click and drag down, and it'll dip even further. If you want less, you can always come up and move down, but then it'll start to show at the top. Right now, it's not concealing anything, but if I turn that on and come. Yeah, there we go. You can start to see it. It might start affecting the top. So what I like to do is, here we go, is just click and drag outward. And that will stretch this out and create less of a dip. You can bring it up a little bit. Just make sure that your center point is generally in the center of your canvas, right in there. You can always pan out and adjust it like this. And so that is what I did in order to get this right here. It dips less. Same thing, you can use your brush and just reveal and hide whatever you want. So this was done just simply by turning off the lower one, which I've got everything expanded here so it looks like a mess, but I just turn this off and you've got single row. This one is the same. I've got the lower one turned off, and I did not merge everything here, but what I have in here is separate folders for the subjects, and so it allows the front row to be done exactly the same, but what you can do is duplicate your folder. If I click the color grade and this, and you can bring it down and move it up, and you have another row. Obviously you would have different subject images in here, but with this one you can move the layer mask so that their legs fade out behind and don't show, you know, they don't show where you don't want them to show. what I'm trying to say. So hopefully that makes sense. So many different scenarios to cover, and I just want everybody to be prepared to handle them. So those are the ways that you can use either the triangle, the single row, or multiple rows. You just have to play with your layer masks and just make some adjustments. So that, man, this is really turning into a long one. Last thing we need to cover is the memory mate real quick, and that's only if you've never used one of my memory mates previously, but I'll include it anyway. So let's jump over the memory mate real quick. All right, so I have the memory mate file pulled up. Just a few things to touch on. One, with your text layers, it's the same thing. You have font option 1, you have font option 2, just like your individual, control it the same way, but that's the only text that you have to worry about. We've got this folder here, subject images, so same thing, place your subject images here in this folder. Below it, with red, we have insert 5x4 team image here. So the way the memory mate works, start with your 5x4 image, create your team image, save it as a JPEG. Once you've done that, you can make your memory mates. So if you have a saved JPEG version of your team image, which we'll use this basketball one as an example, all you have to do is drag and drop. And usually it doesn't fall right into the folder that you want, but you can just click and drag it into the folder. And now, with the original sample as your reference, you can click and drag to scale it. So I'm going to do the height right about there, match up with the top. It doesn't have to be exact. And I'll say that's close enough. You can finesse it. You can delete or remove this one. And now you have your image in there, or your team image. You can play with the drop shadows or turn them off if you don't want drop shadows, but that's there. The only other thing is, if this player was facing in the opposite direction and you wanted a left oriented memory mate, it's very easy to do. So it might look a little weird, but I'm going to flip her. So you can position your subject on this side, and then you would select your insert 5x4 team image folder, hold down controller commands so that you can select the lower text at the same time. This will keep it all together and centered together. And now I'm going to hold down shift, click and drag, and move this over until you get it where you like it, and then you can commit. Now you have a left oriented memory mate, and that is it. So this is one of the longest ones to date, and I just went into so much detail. I know so much of that won't apply to most of you when you're using it, but I just want to cover anything and everything so that in the rare instances where it does come up, it'll be there for you. So let's wrap it up. That's all I have on this one. It's time to start on the next one. If I didn't cover anything that you still have questions on, shoot me an email, don@thirdcreative.com. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.